Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. Coming up in the next hour, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi hosts a virtual G20 Leaders Summit, proposes the setting up of a global social impact fund to promote digital public infrastructure. India invites investments from Nordic and Baltic countries, puts in place institutional frameworks for closer business-to-business cooperation. An Indian Navy warship successfully carries out her maiden test fire of the BrahMos missile. Israel and Hamas agreed to a 4-day pause in fighting, 50 hostages to be released from Gaza. And Indian athletes create history at the Para-Asian Archery Championship, win 9 medals, including 4 golds. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a virtual summit of G20 leaders on Wednesday to discuss the implementation of the Delhi Declaration adopted in September and several new challenges that have emerged since then. Amit Mukherjee reports.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserted on Wednesday that the spirit of one family has the strength to keep the world unified in the fight against terror and violence and help the global community to ensure peace and well-being of humanity. Addressing the virtual summit of G20 leaders, PM Modi reiterated India's commitment to work for the welfare of all.
आज संकटों के जो बादल हम देख रहे हैं, वन फैमिली में वह ताकत है कि हम शांति के लिए काम कर सकते हैं। मानवीय कल्याण के दृष्टिकोण से हम आतंक और हिंसा के विरुद्ध और मानवता के प्रति अपनी आवाज बुलंद कर सकते हैं। आज विश्व की मानवता की इस अपेक्षा की पूर्ति के लिए भारत कदम से कदम मिलाकर चलने के लिए तत्पर है।
On the release of hostages held in Gaza, Prime Minister Modi during the G20 virtual summit welcomed the news of hostage release and hoped that all the hostages will be freed soon.
आतंकवाद हम सभी को अस्वीकार्य है। सिविलियंस की मौत कहीं भी हो निंदनीय है।
All right, let me take you live to the closing remarks by
एक्सेलेंसीज, मैं एक बार फिर आप सभी के बहुमूल्य विचारों की सराहना करता हूं। आप सभी ने जिस खुले मन से अपनी बातें रखी, उसके लिए मैं हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। हमने नई दिल्ली डिक्लेरेशन में कई क्षेत्रों में साझी प्रतिबद्धताएं जताई थी। आज हमने उन्हीं प्रतिबद्धताओं को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए फिर से संकल्प लिया है। हमने डेवलपमेंट एजेंडा के अलावा वैश्विक परिस्थितियां और उनके आर्थिक और सामाजिक प्रभावों पर भी विचार साझा किए हैं। पश्चिम एशिया की गंभीर स्थिति पर आप सभी के विचार सुनने के बाद मैं कह सकता हूं कि G20 में कई विषयों पर सहमति है। पहला, हम सब आतंकवाद और हिंसा की कठोर निंदा करते हैं। देयर इज जीरो टॉलरेंस टू टेररिज्म। दूसरा, मासूम और निर्दोष लोगों, खासकर बच्चों और महिलाओं की मौत स्वीकार्य नहीं है। तीसरा, मानवीय सहायता जल्द से जल्द इफेक्टिवली और सेफली पहुंचाई जाए। चौथा, ह्यूमैनिटेरियन पॉज इस पर बनी सहमति और हॉस्टेजेस की रिहाई के समाचार का स्वागत है। पांचवा, इजराइल और फिलिस्तीन मुद्दे को इसका 2 स्टेट सॉल्यूशन द्वारा स्थायी समाधान जरूरी है। छठा, क्षेत्रीय शांति और स्थिरता की बहाली आवश्यक है। और सातवां, कूटनीति और बातचीत ही भू राजनीतिक तनावों को दूर करने का एकमात्र रास्ता है। इसमें G20 हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है। योर हाइनेसेस, एक्सेलेंसीज, मैं एक बार फिर अपने प्रिय मित्र और ब्राजील के राष्ट्रपति लूला को G20 की अध्यक्षता के लिए शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। मुझे विश्वास है कि ब्राजील की अध्यक्षता में हम ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच के साथ आगे बढ़ते रहेंगे। वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की भावना से एकजुट होकर वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि का मार्ग प्रशस्त करेंगे। ग्लोबल साउथ की अपेक्षाओं के लिए काम करते रहेंगे। हम फूड सिक्योरिटी, हेल्थ सिक्योरिटी और सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट को प्राथमिकता देंगे। मल्टीलेटरल डेवलपमेंट बैंक्स और ग्लोबल गवर्नेंस में सुधार की तरफ जरूर बढ़ेंगे। क्लाइमेट एक्शन के साथ साथ जस्ट, इजी एंड एफोर्डेबल क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस भी सुनिश्चित करवाएंगे। डेट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग के लिए ट्रांसपेरेंट ढंग से कदम उठाए जाएंगे। विमेन लेड डेवलपमेंट, स्किल्ड माइग्रेशन पाथवेज, मीडियम एंड स्मॉल इंडस्ट्रीज के लिए विकास पर बल, ट्रॉइका के सदस्य के रूप में हमारी साझा प्रतिबद्धताओं को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए हमारे दृढ़ संकल्प को मैं दोहराता हूं। मैं ब्राजील को उनकी G20 प्रेसिडेंसी की सफलता के लिए भारत के पूर्ण समर्थन का भरोसा देता हूं। एक बार फिर भारत की G20 अध्यक्षता की सफलता में आप सभी के सहयोग के लिए धन्यवाद करता हूं। आप सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, you were listening to the concluding remarks by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the virtual G20 Leaders Summit, in which he spoke about 6 or 7 points on the West Asia conflict in particular. He began by saying that there is consensus across the G20 member countries for zero tolerance to terrorism. He says the G20 condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. He went on to say that the deaths of women and children is not welcome. He says humanitarian aid should be made available quickly to those in need. And the pause in fighting and release of hostages is welcome again. He went on to say that for a permanent solution, the parties concerned need to go back to the issue of a two-state solution. And finally, he spoke about regional security. He then went on to say that looking ahead to the Brazilian presidency of the G20, he hoped for a continued focus on human-centric development. And last but not the least, he spoke about the expectations of the global South from the G20 in particular. Right, moving on News Hour for now. The second CII India Nordic Baltic Business Conclave brought together ministers from Finland, Sweden and other countries. India's Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar highlighted that India offers immense opportunities for the Nordic countries.
While addressing the second CII India Nordic Baltic Business Conclave, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said that the country's talent pool, digital adoption and startup ecosystem align well with the Baltic region's prominence in digital innovation, supply chain management and other industries.
This conclave is significant because it reflects the growing awareness of our two regions about the possibilities and opportunities in cooperation. This certainly speaks of a more globalized era, but from India's perspective, also of an expanding footprint.
We are looking at two very different futures. We are looking at how we are going to be able to mesh the intricacies or the difficulties of very, very different geographies, very, very different starting points.
Finland's trade minister said that there is a lot of scope for further improvement.
People-to-people exchanges and business connectivity are the key to enhance our economic development and prosperity, as well as to foster creativity, learning and mutual understanding. This is one particular area where Finland looks forward to enhance cooperation with India significantly.
Sweden's Minister for Financial Markets said that trade between India and Sweden is at an all-time high.
Bilateral trade between Sweden and India is at record high. We are co-creating and innovating together like never before. We're building competitive advantages for decades to come and are enabling the transition to a fossil-free economy. Sweden and India have a very valuable relationship.
The CIA India Nordic Baltic Business Conclave focuses on bringing together various stakeholders, facilitating dialogue on key focus sectors, building new business partnerships, laying the groundwork for potential policy changes, and creating opportunities to facilitate these partnerships. Fuzail Ahmed's report for DD India.
India's Minister of State for External Affairs and Parliamentary Affairs, V. Muralidharan, met with Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua of Kenya on Wednesday during his 4-day visit to East African countries of Kenya and Tanzania. The two leaders met at Kenya's capital, Nairobi, and discussed ways to enhance cooperation, emphasizing commitment to bolster the two countries' bilateral relationship. All right, I'm joined now by my colleague Amritpal Singh for more on the virtual G20 Leaders Summit. Amrit, if you can hear me, we just heard the Indian Prime Minister's closing remarks to that summit. What are the important takeaways from that speech, and generally looking back at the several hours of discussions among the G20 member countries?
It's very clear, Ramesh, that today's discussions took place in the context of what is happening, what is transpiring in West Asia. Because the Prime Minister's closing remarks gave a substantive part to the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, where he listed out that how, terrorism is not acceptable, is unacceptable, and he said there will be, the G20 agrees that there has to be zero tolerance towards terrorism. Then he also spoke about, giving the general sense that obviously other leaders would have taken their positions, but he said that the deaths of civilians must stop, especially that of women and children, and their safety should be of prime concern to the world. Also, the Prime Minister listed out that there should be humanitarian pauses, and the humanitarian relief, the unimpeded humanitarian relief, should be allowed inside. And he said that the hostages should be released as soon. All hostages should be released as soon as possible. And he also listed out that for the long term, the two-state solution must be executed. There has to be a political solution to the problem, which has been the consistent stand of India all along. He also made the point that there should be the way forward is through dialogue and diplomacy, and the two sides should speak to each other and resolve this through talks, through dialogue and diplomacy must continue, which is India's stand even in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, when he had told both sides, both Ukrainians and the Russians, that dialogue and diplomacy is the way forward. And we saw that reflect in the New Delhi declaration. I think on the other takeaways, he said that he congratulated Prime Minister Lula and said that the aspirations, concerns, agenda of the global South should continue, and during the Brazilian presidency, reform of multilateral development banks, development finance, even on climate change. So he said this agenda should continue during the Brazilian presidency. Ramesh?
All right, we leave it at that. Amritpal Singh, thank you. Once again, appreciate it. And still to come on DD India News Hour. A review of India's G20 presidency as New Delhi hosts a virtual summit prior to handing over the baton to Brazil. The Indian Air Force flies in special equipment to rescue 41 workers trapped in an under-construction tunnel in India. And Minister of Foreign Affairs and Tourism of Seychelles is in New Delhi on a 3-day visit to India.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution. This series is going to tell stories of such change makers. Watch Change Makers on DD India.
In a world that never stops, where information shapes our reality, one app stands out, helps you stay ahead of time. Introducing the DD India app, your gateway to a world of news right at your fingertips. Your most trusted source of news goes global, goes digital. Explore a world of options, top stories, live updates, in-depth analysis, and more. Stay informed wherever you are. Real-time alerts keep you ahead of the curve always. The DD India app, connecting you to the world one story at a time. Download now and explore the world of knowledge, insights, and authentic information.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. Going back to the top story, the G20 virtual summit hosted by India. Mr. Sanjay Bhattacharya joins us from New Delhi. Mr. Bhattacharya is a former Indian ambassador to Switzerland, Turkey and Egypt. Ambassador Bhattacharya, welcome to DD India News Hour. Now, first off the mark, what did you make of the Indian Prime Minister's speeches, the opening remarks and the concluding remarks? What stood out for you in his two speeches?
Of course, I think this is a very special moment for the G20 movement, because this is the first time that we've had a second summit in the course of the same presidency.
Right.
And of course, as was outlined at the outset by Prime Minister, the idea was to consolidate the progress made and review some of the developments since the Leaders Summit last time. And of course, there have been some very important steps and developments that have happened, particularly on the development agenda, the Israel-Hamas issue, and of course, a range of other issues that we wish to review before we hand over the presidency to Brazil. And Prime Minister referred to both these in his remarks. And I think this now sets the stage for a very successful presidency by India, in which we have provided two very key elements. The first was that it is possible to gain consensus. And the second was that we have sent out a message of hope when there are so many challenges, as Prime Minister himself put out.
Ambassador Bhattacharya, as you rightly mentioned in your opening intervention there, it's the first time that India as a host hosted two G20 summits in one calendar year. Now, the idea, we are told, was to take stock of the progress made so far and to prepare for the future. Do you think India has raised the bar?
I think it has. And in many ways, it is quite natural for India to do so, because right from the outset, you would recall at the time when we were part of the G8 plus mechanism, which then subsequently became the G20, India's voice was always very important. And today, in recent years, we've seen that India has grown as a nation that not only has greater ability, but the greater willingness to lead on several of these global issues. The championing of the cause of the global south was one of those. The championing of the cause of having a fair representation in global institutions and global governance was another one. To look at the issue of development, sustainable development, and link it up with issues like debt financing, climate finance was another one, and to bring consensus, as I had mentioned earlier, on very critical geostrategic political issues that had escaped the movement earlier.
I want to dwell a little bit more on this particular issue. Now, looking in the rearview mirror, Ambassador Bhattacharya, as it were, how do you assess or analyze India's G20 presidency, especially when it comes to focusing the G20 attention on issues such as the global south, sustainable development, or even equitable growth?
So, as you know, in the past, the G20 had really addressed on economic stability, financial stability issues. When the entry of India and other members came in, the issue of growth and development started becoming more crucial, as also the role and importance of the governance of international multilateral institutions. Now, these are very necessary for developing countries like ours, which are very aspirational, but we don't always have a full share in the on the global table in terms of the voice that we need to represent. And I think over the years, India, along with other partners, particularly from the global south, has been pushing this particular cause. And I think in this particular presidency, we've seen great success. And it is with some satisfaction and with some hope that the subsequent presidencies of Brazil and South Africa, and we were earlier with Indonesia, that this global south contingent of the G20 will be able to carry this flag further. Because there was a dichotomy, if I may say, that was coming about between the OECD countries and the countries of the global south. And I think in many ways, in terms of institution, in terms of priorities, in terms of the focus, and in terms of some of the concrete actions that have been outlined, we have been able to do course correction on that.
Ambassador Bhattacharya, one major outcome from the New Delhi summit was the inclusion of the African Union as a G20 member. For the benefit of viewers joining this broadcast, what does the inclusion of the AU as a G20 member mean for the bloc as a whole?
So firstly, I think what has happened is that we had seen for a long time that multilateral institutions and even plurilateral ones did not give adequate representation to developing countries, to emerging economies. And particular in this was the absence of the global south in decision-making positions on the big table where economic, financial issues were being discussed. Africa in particular was a continent that was almost forgotten. And we often forgot that Africa is really the continent of the future. It has huge resources, demography is favorable, it has resolved many of its old conflicts within. And so this is a continent that we need to work much more collaboratively with. And therefore the inclusion of the African Union, and you recall that Prime Minister made a personal pitch with every member of the G20, writing personally to the heads of state or government of the G20 members to get Africa in, the African Union. And I think the fact that he took this initiative so seriously led to African Union becoming a member on the very first day. And therefore, when the New Delhi summit happened, the African Union was there right from the outset, and the chair of the African Union was welcomed at that particular event. So what this does is it extends the opportunities that are available available, not only for the developing world of the global south, but also for further collaborations between the North and the South. It also means that the new paradigm of the Indo-Pacific, which is becoming every day much more dominant and important, has this connect with the continent of Africa. Prime Minister had said that, we believe in this concept of Sagar, which links the Indian and the Pacific Oceans to the continent of Africa. And so the salience of Africa has become much more important. And this is a very, very welcome development.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Ambassador Bhattacharya, thank you once again for joining us and sharing your insights with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. In other news, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Tourism of Seychelles is in New Delhi on a 3-day visit to India. The visiting minister will meet India's External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar on Thursday to discuss further strengthening of the partnership between the two countries. Two Indian Army captains and a Jawan attained martyrdom while a Jawan was injured during an encounter between security forces and terrorists in Rajouri district in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The encounter broke out between terrorists and joint forces of the army and the Jammu and Kashmir police in the Bajimal area of Rajouri district following a cordon and search operation. The fierce gunfight went on in the area with the induction of more troops to neutralize two terrorists trapped at the spot. The ongoing mission to rescue the 41 trapped workers from the Silkyara tunnel in India's Uttarakhand state gained new momentum, with the personnel of the National Disaster Relief Force seen entering the tunnel on Wednesday. Rescuers have been battling to pull out the 41 men stuck in a 4.5-kilometer-long tunnel. The workers have been trapped after a portion of the Silkyara tunnel caved in early on the 12th of November. The officials have assured that all workers are safe and secure, and food and water are being supplied to them via an alternate 6-inch pipeline opening. India's central bank governor Shaktikanta Das said that the world's perception about India has changed decisively in the last few years because of various factors, mainly on the economic front. The RBI governor spoke about the current account deficit, which is not a concern now. Addressing an annual banking conference jointly organized by FICCI and Indian Banks Association, Das spoke about contemporary global challenges such as the Ukraine-Russia conflict or the Israel-Hamas war in the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The Indian economy rebounded strongly from the COVID-induced contraction of 5.8% in 2021 to a growth of 9.1% in 21-22 and 7.2% in the last financial year 22-23. The international confidence on India's prospects is at a new high. It is an opportune time to make this India's moment and work towards strong, sustainable and inclusive growth.
The RBI governor underlined key issues with the conduct of monetary policy. He said that the monetary policy actions of India's central bank over the last 1.5 years consisted of prioritization of inflation ahead of growth and narrowing the liquidity adjustment facility corridor, among others.
The monetary policy actions of the Reserve Bank over the last 1.5 years, consisting of prioritization of inflation ahead of growth, and as you would recall, we did it in May 2022, or rather April 2022, we did it. That is prioritization of inflation ahead of growth, narrowing the liquidity adjustment facility corridor, increasing the policy repo rate by 250 basis points cumulatively starting May 2022 till now, draining out excess liquidity, together with certain supply-side measures undertaken by the government, have facilitated significant softening of headline inflation to 4.9% in October 2023. The moderation in core inflation in particular is noteworthy.
Now take a look at some other stories making news in India. India has resumed the e-visa service for Canadian nationals on Wednesday after nearly 2 months. India had suspended visa services on 21st September amid an ongoing diplomatic row over Canada's claims that the agents of the Indian government were involved in the June killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. An MOU was signed between the Inland Waterways Authority of India and the Amazon Seller Services Private Limited in the presence of India's Ports and Waterways Minister Sarbananda Sonowal and IWAI Chairperson Sanjay Bandyopadhyay for promoting cargo movement and transportation of customer shipments and products via inland waterways using the waters of the river Ganga. India's National Investigation Agency on Wednesday carried out raids at 14 locations in Punjab and Haryana in connection with its probe into the attacks on the Indian consulate in San Francisco earlier this year. The raids were carried out at locations across multiple districts of the two states of Punjab and Haryana. Parts of the southern Indian state of Kerala and Tamil Nadu witnessed heavy rainfall on Wednesday. The India Meteorological Department predicted further rainy spells throughout the upcoming days this week. Puducherry and Karaikal regions also endured continuous rains over the last 24 hours. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Israel and Hamas agree on a deal to free 50 hostages and scores of Palestinian prisoners in return for a 4-day pause in fighting. An indigenously built Indian Navy warship successfully test fires the extended-range BrahMos missile. And South Korea suspends a 2018 military pact with North Korea after Pyongyang launches a spy satellite.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. Let me take you live now to the Ministry of External Affairs briefing that's taking place in New Delhi.
Honorable External Affairs Minister, Honorable Finance Minister Sherpa, as well as Secretary DA, who have just actually come from LKM to tell us about the conversations. May I request External Affairs Minister, sir, to give opening remarks, and then perhaps Madam.
Thank you. Very good evening. It's a pleasure to meet you all, even if it's a bit late. Today's virtual G20 summit, which was chaired by the Prime Minister, has concluded just a little while ago. All 21 members of the G20, including the AU, the 9 guest countries and 11 international organizations participated in the meeting. The discussions were fruitful, they were very productive. All leaders congratulated Prime Minister on a successful steering of India's G20 presidency. Let me set out the context for the virtual G20 summit. As you're all aware, the New Delhi Leaders Summit saw the unanimous adoption of the New Delhi Leaders Declaration. Now, at its closing session, Prime Minister had suggested to G20 leaders that we could reconvene virtually at the end of November to look at suggestions and proposals made at the September summit by participating leaders, and also to review summit outcomes and accelerate progress on them. Secondly, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting was held in Marrakesh in mid-October. After the New Delhi summit, it achieved some very notable outcomes on MDB reforms and other important areas of the finance track, and the finance minister would be speaking about it. Third, there have been major geopolitical developments in the last 2.5 months since the New Delhi summit, and they obviously have consequences for global development and growth. The situation in West Asia has deteriorated dramatically, which has serious implications for the region and the world. And this has come on the back of the conflict in Ukraine. Fourth, the outcomes of the second Voice of the Global South Summit, which again you know was held only recently on the 17th of November, also fed into the virtual summit deliberations. Now, in terms of what was discussed today, I would say mostly there were progress on the agenda of the New Delhi summit. Of course, there were the two geopolitical issues which came up in some, the Middle East, West Asia, Gaza situation came up in greater detail, to some extent also the Ukraine conflict and its consequences. In terms of Prime Minister's own remarks, I think that you would have seen it is already in the public domain. Now, the virtual G20 summit, we believe, is very significant because it is also the first gathering of world leaders after the outbreak of conflict in West Asia. As I said, many leaders spoke about it, and what we heard really were condemnation of terrorism, expression of deep concern over the loss of civilian lives, calls for extending timely and adequate humanitarian assistance, not allowing the conflict to spread, and to find a long-term solution for the Palestine issue. G20 members on the whole welcomed the understanding which has been reached on the release of hostages, on the flow of relief material to Gaza, and some pause in the fighting. So overall, there was a strong sentiment expressed by the leaders to ensure implementation of the commitments which were agreed to at New Delhi. Prime Minister Modi assured President Lula of Brazil of India's fullest support as Brazil takes over the presidency. We will be part of the G20 Troika, and together we will continue to take forward the outcomes achieved during our presidency. So with that broad overview, may I request Finance Minister to make her remarks.
Today on the G20 finance track related issues, let me start by saying every one of the 5 main agenda points which had been discussed over the year had been reiterated. They were welcomed. In fact, most of them elaborated, saying we are looking forward to building more on those agenda. Just quickly, I'll recall the 5 for your benefit. MDB reforms, digital public infrastructure, on which India, I'll give you the details. India is now signing memorandum of understanding with many countries. The roadmap for crypto assets, climate finance, and financing of cities of tomorrow. On all these agenda, as was reflected in the Delhi Declaration, there was overwhelming appreciation and keenness to take it forward during the next presidency. Particularly on the MDB reforms, there were several reiterations for building a better, bigger and more effective multilateral development banking institutions. Now, even as I say this, several MDBs are already exploring options of collaborating with each other in areas such as innovative finance. So the International Expert Group's report has been welcomed. Many aspects of it are already set on course. The boards are taking it up for each of the banks, particularly the World Bank has already started doing a lot of action which are reflective of what the recommendations are. When I said banks are collaborating with one another in looking at ways of innovative financing. I take the example of the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, who are now collaborating on developing hybrid capital instruments. So you see that people are in the multilateral development banks already initiating many of the suggestions which have come through the international experts group. The other which I want to highlight on is that the US administration has asked US Congress to increase the World Bank's financing by more than 25 billion. Germany has pledged 305 million euros of hybrid capital that can be used by the World Bank to have additional IBRD lending of 2.4 billion euros over the next 10 years. So you already see action in place, and therefore the India presidency's effort to bring in the international experts group to look into serious ways of improving the efficiency, making the banks, multilateral development banks, more 21st century ready, are taking shape. The multilateral assistance are also being speeded up by the MDB, and the processes have all been ramped up. On that particularly, today I had Kristalina Georgieva referring to the debt roundtable, which was initiated during our presidency. World Bank and IMF are actively engaging with all creditors for each of the countries so that solutions are arrived at the earliest. The next agenda on which there was a lot of a sense of working together, and I was very glad to hear the FSB speaking about the crypto asset framework on which they wanted the roadmap is ready, they wanted countries to take it up, and it is only through that we are going to have the risks which have to be managed by particularly the emerging market countries, which can be handled, because the roadmap actually has looked into some specific areas, and the mandate therefore includes proposing tailor-made measures to mitigate risks specific to the emerging market and developing economies, identifying appropriate strategies and outlining how to enhance the capabilities and capacities of these economies to face the risks that these crypto assets can face, or crypto assets can pose to us. So on the crypto, I was glad to see that today, much beyond the Delhi Declaration, there were efforts to highlight that countries can go ahead with the roadmap and have their own templates to deal with the crypto risks. On the digital public infrastructure, I did mention to you that India is signing MOUs with countries. The overall sense of appreciation on the importance of digital public infrastructure is seen as DPI promote sustainable and inclusive growth, advance financial inclusion through capacity building, technical assistance and adequate support. India's own effort in this, even as our presidency was on and after the Delhi Declaration, is seen in that we have signed with 7 countries MOUs through which we are going to share our experience, our technologies, and also share our experience with these countries. Now, India is also at an advanced stage with few more countries. On cross-border, you know that cross-border acceptance of UPI was already made effective with Singapore and UAE. Now we are looking at very many more countries who will be taking this up so that they can provide an acceptance to our UPI and provide QR at merchant establishments. So even that's moving forward. If I can add a bit more onto the way in which crypto would also be dealt with, is we have the G20 has formally adopted the roadmap, but Indian presidency is also going to be working with the Brazilian presidency the IMF, FSB, and the FATF will be required to provide regular updates to the G20 regarding the progress and implementation of the G20 roadmap on crypto assets. And that's where I began by quoting the FSB. I again bring FSB into the picture. It was very clearly mentioned that not just the G20 countries, but also beyond that, which means more of FSB's members, who are more than 100, will all have to be now contacted by FSB, G20 and others to see that an effective mechanism is placed in each of the countries so that nowhere there is a loophole in controlling the crypto assets. The last 2 points are on climate finance. Timely and adequate mobilization of climate finance has also remained high on our agenda during our presidency. Today we heard a lot of members talking about this and how important this will be. Climate finance has been emphasized in terms of new collective quantified goals that we have to arrive by 2024. There was frequent reference by all the members talking about next we meet at COP28. So this marked the major last summit under virtual, however, under the Indian presidency, and effectively ends the Indian presidency. But there was a lingering memory of this presidency moving over to COP28, which was referred to by most members, saying we are going to carry forward our agenda on climate finance to the next. Just one or two things to say that we are not meeting in the context of this summit, which is virtual. After the Delhi Declaration, there has been significant movement. There was an international seminar on DPI in which 100 countries participated. So when I told you about crypto, even in DPI, 100 countries have participated in this seminar. They were largely from Asia, Africa, and Middle East. And MOUs are being signed to share technology. Second was also a seminar on strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth and multilateral institutions for 21st century. Even in that, many countries participated, shared their experiences. External Affairs Minister just a moment ago referred to the second voice of this Global South Summit. A special session was held on financing people-centric development. So beyond Delhi Declaration, even that has been taken up. As a member of the Troika, the Honorable Prime Minister himself mentioned that we will be playing a constructive role during the Brazilian presidency in taking forward many of the points that I've just referred to. Thank you. Back over.
Just 2 points. One is that today we had 22 heads of government and all heads of international organization participating in it. So it was a very, very well attended virtual conference. And secondly, that since G20 works in continuity, our focus since 9th and 10th of September has been on implementation. A lot of things have been implemented, both domestically, and we are pushing for implementation. And a number of things which we have taken up, like working group on Women's 20, Startup 20, disaster risk resilience, are all being carried forward by Brazil. Brazil's theme is build a fair world and a sustainable future, under that, most of what we have announced in the New Delhi Leaders Declaration, we'll push as a member of Troika, we'll push for implementation under the Brazil presidency now. That's all.
Thank you very much. We have take a few questions, but please keep it very tight. We'll take it in a group. Okay, Siddhant, you can start. Please introduce yourself and the organization.
I'm Siddhant from Beyond. My question is to EM Jaishankar, sir. Sir, my first question is on how we were able to bring the voice of the Global South at the high table. We hosted the 2 summits. How did the inputs from those 2 summits were able to be brought at this summit, the G20 virtual summit? And secondly, the absence of the Chinese President Xi Jinping. He's again missed the virtual summit. How do you see that as?
Next idea.
Sir, Shruti Ranjan from Bloomberg, sir. Question to the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar. Sir, if you could give us an understanding on the West Asia situation, as you said, everybody spoke about it. Is there a possibility, and we heard the Prime Minister saying that G20 is going to help, is there a possibility that, it's going to take forward a proposal and ensure that there is peace in the area?
Yeah, right. Microphone there, please.
Kalul Bhattacharjee from The Hindu. As far as the spillover effect of the Gaza crisis is concerned, I noticed that External Affairs Minister, you have referred to it that leaders are concerned about the expansion of the conflict, possible expansion of the conflict. In such a scenario, what is really our preparation as far as the diaspora is concerned? Because we have a large number of Indians living in the Gulf region. They are also perhaps part of our concerns at the moment. Their safety and security is something that perhaps we should think about.
Rishabh.
So this is Rishabh from Times Now. A question to EM, sir, from where Bloomberg left. Sir, when Prime Minister discussed about two-state solution, was there an understanding and discussion, and was it a unanimous decision to work on a two-state solution by all the G20 members, or was it the India statement on two-state solution?
I see no further questions. I think we'll...
Can I just club them?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
I think most of the questions relate to West Asia and Gaza. What actually, the Prime Minister's own position, I think all of you would have heard, so I don't need to reiterate that. Most of the leaders, in some form or the other, expressed something similar. The emphasis and the selection of words may be different. Some would have put some aspects of it stronger, some would have put other aspects of it. But I would say there was a broad overlap of views there. Was there a G20 proposal itself? No, I think everybody actually welcomed what had been agreed to, as a result of Qatar, United States and Egypt working out this particular understanding. On the two-state solution, many countries, I would say, spoke about it explicitly. Perhaps, overwhelming would be, but I would not say, in all honesty, everybody did. Again, I cannot say there was a consensus on a two-state solution. I think on this whole idea of a spillover, I honestly, I would say the focus is right now on ensuring it doesn't even spill over beyond, where it is. So I don't think the kind of scenario you are suggesting was something which anybody even remotely spoke about. In terms of Siddhant, your question, President Xi Jinping not being there. Look, it's for a country to decide, who represents them, and Prime Minister Li Qiang had represented them at the G20 New Delhi summit as well. So they chose to continue with that. And is there a carryover? I think, as an example, what Finance Minister herself said, that the finance track of the Voice of Global South has actually fed into the G20 finance track as well. But there was one point, I think, which all of us would have noted today, a very clear recognition that India's G20 presidency was global South-centric, and it had brought development back fair, square and center of the G20. I think this was a very widely voiced thought, not just among the G20 members, but also, I would say, among the international organizations.
All right, we're listening to the Indian External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar's briefing on the virtual G20 Leaders Summit. Moving on to some other news here on this special broadcast, Israel and Hamas announced a deal on Wednesday allowing at least 50 hostages and scores of Palestinian prisoners to be freed while offering the civilians in Gaza a 4-day truce. The deal, reached on day 47 of the war, follows negotiations mediated by Qatar. The truce is expected to begin at 8 a.m. GMT on Thursday. Tripti Tripathi reports.
Israel's government and Hamas agreed on Wednesday to a ceasefire in Gaza for at least 4 days. The deal allows for the release of at least 50 hostages in exchange for up to 150 Palestinians jailed in Israel.
We are at war and we will continue to fight until we reach all our goals. In war, there are stages, and also in the returning of hostages, there are stages. But we will not let go until we reach the absolute victory and until we bring them all back.
It will also enable entry of food, medicine and fuel into the enclave.
The release of a number of our prisoners during the war is a very important thing. This deal can signal a start to a change in the general atmosphere of this war.
Hamas and allied groups had captured more than 200 hostages when its cadres rampaged through the southern Israeli towns on October 7th.
Nobody can imagine how we feel, okay? Imagine that your kid instead sleep in the bed with blanket and it's underground, deep. It's deep tunnels.
A statement by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said 50 women and children would be released over 4 days at a rate of at least 10 per day. Beyond that, the truce could be extended as long as an additional 10 hostages are freed per day. It made no mention of the release of Palestinian detainees, but Israel's Justice Ministry published a list of 300 names of Palestinian prisoners who could be freed. For its part, Hamas said that the initial 50 hostages would be released in exchange of 150 Palestinian women and children held in Israeli jails. US President Joe Biden was among the international leaders who welcomed the deal. A US official said that the 3 US nationals, including a 3-year-old girl whose parents were among those killed in the war, are expected to be among the hostages to be released.
We're now very close, very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon, but I don't want to get into the details of things because nothing is done until it's done. And when we have more to say, we will, but things are looking good at the moment.
More than half the hostages hold foreign or dual citizenships. The hostages belong to some 40 countries: the US, Thailand, the UK, France, Argentina, Germany, Chile, Spain and Portugal. The October 7 attacks by Hamas killed many civilians. Will this conflict end anytime soon remains to be seen. Ramesh Ramachandran reporting for DD India.
Indian athletes created history at the Para-Asian Archery Championship by winning 9 medals that included 4 golds, 4 silvers and 1 bronze medal. Rakesh Kumar bagged 3 gold medals in the men's individual compound event, men's and mixed team events. Sheetal Devi won 1 gold and silver each in the women's individual compound event after losing to Indonesia in a close encounter. The recurve men and women's team and the men's W1 team won a silver after losing their respective finals. Meanwhile, Sheetal Devi won the bronze medal in the individual compound championship. India will host Afghanistan for 3 T20 cricket matches in January. The Afghanistan Cricket Board said that it's the first time the 2 sides will meet in a multi-match white ball series. The series will begin on 11th January in Mohali before moving to Indore for a match on the 14th of January. The final match will be played at Bengaluru on 17th. Afghanistan were once considered World Cup minnows, but they wrapped up the recently concluded showpiece event in India with 4 wins and sealed a place in the Champions Trophy by finishing 6th. That's all for this edition of DD India News. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also check out our website ddindia.co.in. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Ramesh Ramachandran. From all of us here in New Delhi, thanks for watching DD India News Hour.